Forget that. There we go. Everybody probably heard that. So welcome. Contributors, please remember to enter your information in the chat so people can reach out to you. Brewers, brewery owners, as you join us, please feel free to connect with our contributors via the chat, or feel free to bring questions when we get to our general Q&A section of the programming today. Want to say thank you to those of you who came by after the CCBA conference. I know it was pretty scarce and a little bit late that everybody kind of came by, but there were some friendly faces. So thank you to UC Davis for sponsoring that. And we're super excited to be gathering in person at CBC. So if you're going to make that trip, please reserve Monday afternoon from 3:30 to 5:30. That's, I hope, after you're all done setting up in any sort of expo zone and before we need to go to the welcome reception if you're doing that. So that's going to be at Lakes and Legends. And thanks to Chestnut Cambron, to Jeff, who's not here yet today, for sponsoring that. That's going to be super fun. And I get to come to that, so I'm excited to see you. And I always want to, when we start these resource groups, I always want to kind of harken back to our mission, kind of helps to keep us on the right track. Start a Brewery is, we created it. Candace and I created it to provide an educational resource free of charge for dreamers, startups, and expanding breweries and brewery owners. This raises the bar for savvy startups and helps to lower any barriers to entry. To do this, we've created our website and invited experienced industry professionals and programs to be part of our community. Our resource groups strengthen our community and provide both an educational opportunity and give brewers and owners the chance to meet our contributors and ask questions of individual contributors or of the group. So to the educational portion of our programming, we have a contributor spotlight, and here comes Nicole. And today our contributor spotlight shines on Misty Gordon. Misty's going to talk about marketing. We kind of rotate our contributor spotlight each session to talk about a different section of the world of craft beer business. And she comes to us with some branding fundamentals, and I'll turn it over to Misty.
Hi, I have not actually been on my own screen before, but I've seen many of you on Laura's screen. So I'm really glad to be here. It's kind of my first time to give this kind of a talk. I do a few things in the college arena, but that's more teaching kind of basic design principles. So this is the first time I'm talking about branding in this particular way. My original degree is in social psychology, and I got that back in the 90s. We'll just leave it at that. We don't need a date. After a year of working in kind of the nonprofit social work arena, I realized that that is not for me. It's way, way heart-wrenching. And so I launched into advertising. And so my husband jokes that I went to the dark side for a decade, and I worked in advertising for 10 years. After that, I decided I kind of wanted to be a little bit more of the solution and create the solution instead of just banding about what that would be. And so I had worked with a number of graphic artists over the course of 10 years and decided to go back to school, got a degree in multimedia graphic design. And in 2010, I started my own company. It's just me. So the company is Misty Gordon Creative, because when somebody hires me, they are literally hiring me, nobody else. In 2011, I was in Hawaii and we were listening to craft beer podcasts, and Laura Lodge was being interviewed about Big Beers Festival. And the guy says, so what is your, I can't remember how he phrased it, but what's the thing you hate to do the most, or that you dislike the most, or something? And she said, the program. And my husband looks at me and he goes, you should contact her. You should email her, call her, and tell her that that's what you do. And I'm like, really? That seems really crazy, but I did. And so I sent her a crazy email saying, hey, here's who I am. I want to do the program for Big Beers. And all I want is the ticket to go to the festival for my husband and I. And she said, that sounds wonderful. Let's talk about it. And there you are, from pretty much for the Big Beers 2012 until now. She's become one of my greatest advocates and honestly one of my best friends in the world when it comes to creating anything that has to do with craft beer. So we've done some wonderful projects together, and I couldn't be happier with those experiences. So from that point on, we've kind of grown a whole bunch of things. And in this last year, especially, I've noticed, maybe it was a COVID thing, I'm not sure, a whole lot of breweries starting up again. There was a mass rush, as everybody in the industry knows, there for a while, that it was like every time I turned around, there was breweries popping up. I'm in Colorado Springs, so we probably had 20 start in about a 2-year span. But then it slowed down a whole bunch. And then over the course of COVID, I think some people didn't make it, unfortunately. And I think others realized they wanted to try to make their dream a reality. So from that point of view, I worked with a whole bunch of different kinds of companies, but I'm going to try to force this branding discussion more in the craft beer realm, since that's kind of what we're all how we're all connected. So the number one thing that happens for me when somebody calls me is that they say, hey, so I'm going to start a brewery. I know my name, and in essence, I know my favorite color. And so I've decided I need a logo. I talked to a lawyer maybe, and they said, we need a logo. And I go, that's great. So let me ask you a whole bunch of questions. And then they start freaking out a little bit. But I kind of try to explain that the brand is not just a logo. That's a wonderful concept. If it was that easy, and it was at one time, I think, but it's not anymore. If it was that easy, pretty much the people who come to me that their 16-year-old nephew, took six weeks of Photoshop in a high school class and made their logo, they'd be set. But that's not the case. Branding has like become this huge piece that is not just about a logo and that's all. There's so many things to consider that I find that most people have thought through them or know the answers, but they don't realize they know the answers because they didn't know that those questions existed. And some of the basic things that I do is kind of the investigative process. This is probably something that any graphic artist would do. They're going to ask a whole bunch of questions to kind of get a feel for what it is that you're trying to accomplish. But sometimes it kind of depends on who you're working with, because we're all special snowflakes. Every business is different. Every person is different. Every graphic artist is different. So the amount of information they're going to require before they start the process might be more or less. I have colleagues that pretty much want a dissertation about why you're going into business, what your plans are, what your goals are, how you expect to make those happen, who your market is, who you're targeting that's outside the market that you think you already have, before they'll even start the process. I tend to be a little more like, let me ask some of the really, really basic questions, and then we'll move on from there. A lot of times with startups, they can't actually verbally tell me the answer, but as we work through the design process, then they're able to answer the questions when we figure out what colors and what is the purpose of this mark, and why are you using that color. They don't realize that colors mean things that are significant. And just because you like turquoise doesn't mean that a brewery logo should be turquoise. So going through figuring out the brand identity, there's a ton of questions to ask. Everything from why are you building this, why are you creating this business, to what's your end all goal and what have you. So along the lines of the nuts and bolts of what do you do, why are you doing it, then there's all the personality and those pieces as well. So the last one that we did, Laura actually did with me, was for a farm in Ohio. They've been a farm for 50 years. They knew their brand because it's their heritage. It's part of their family. It was passed down, but they decided to add a brewing company to the farm itself. So we kind of went back, in essence, not rebranding, but defining their brand that they already had, but they didn't really ever think about it in those terms. And the easiest way to do that is to kind of just brainstorm what terms make the most sense to your business. And, local, heritage, tradition, family oriented, all of those things mean something. So when you start to build that logo, which then becomes their colors, choosing their typography that matches with that vibe and that feel, all of those pieces come into play. And you kind of are creating an entire toolkit for them to launch into the next piece. So the logo is important, but there's also a voice that you're going to be presenting to people. There's all the other pieces, advertising pieces, there's collateral and signage. There's being able to display your brand within your business and outside to other people. So when I talk about branding, I'm talking about everything from, are you picking the right tap handle to show what your business is about? Ben can speak more on that. He's tap handle guy. Are you choosing the right colors? Are you choosing the right typography? I don't know how many I've been to a bazillion breweries. I don't know how many I walk into and I can't read what the beers are. Either somebody hand wrote them and you can't read, it's illegible, you can't read their handwriting, or they're just put in such a font that maybe that's fantastic, it looks really cool, but you still have to be able to read because otherwise you don't know what to order or you don't know what you're getting. But there's so many pieces that go into a brand besides just the logo. It's a good starting point, but it's certainly not the ending point. You want me to say more, Laura?
You're welcome to say more, or I can start with questions.
Sure.
I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit more about how the personality of the people involved comes through when you're doing branding.
In what aspect? That, like, the individual, how it affects the brand?
Right. If you're talking about people who are more wild and wacky, or people who are more conservative, kind of the style of the voice. How does the voice kind of impact how you brand them in terms of graphics?
Well, it's funny because it's significant. People don't realize that color has meaning, but type carries meaning too. Like if you look at different typesets, it invokes different feelings. It's come through the centuries, different typefaces. And so I have had a guy recently, I hope he's not here. No, he's not. that wanted a very traditional mark, right? His logo was going to be very traditional, but he kept kind of insisting that this weird type be used. It looked like a paintbrush. We eventually worked through why that didn't work. And I think he had some feedback from maybe some of the people around him why that wasn't going to work. It was very legible, so that was not the issue. It was just, it didn't fit the feeling of everything else that he was choosing and what he wanted. I think that all of the pieces, it's the disconnect for me is like, if you walk into a restaurant that says it's family friendly and you've got your kids with you and you're ready to like have this family friendly experience, and you walk in and they're playing rap music and there's white tablecloths, you're like, what kind of disconnect is this? Because that's not what you're expecting. So I think the main thing is kind of figuring out, are you a wacky brand? Are you, off center, or are you really traditional? Are you family friendly, or are you looking for a younger, hipper crowd? not that hip's a word anymore, but dating myself. I don't know. So there's something to be said for what that person's personality is and what they're trying to invoke. I prefer that you are going to be authentic to yourself because it makes a better brand. So if a husband and wife are starting a brewery and they're going with a really staunch, uptight atmosphere, but they're really kind of wild and friendly and out there, it's not going to work because you've got to represent your business. You are that business. So I find that it works better if you kind of are a little more authentic to your wants and your needs. Now with bigger companies that have multiple people weighing in on everything, it's harder.
I've got one more and then I'll toss it out for anybody else. It's been cool to see things like to see you age a logo. I think that was way cool to see you do that. Are there other things that are kind of characteristics that come through like that really help to convey an attitude or an image? I'm also kind of wanting to ask you that button pushing question of how do you talk people away from putting hops and grain in everything they do?
Well, seeing that I just did a logo with both hops and grain in it, even though that's like the antithesis of my no, please no. I think it depends on whether it works or not. The issue is that using hops and grain in a brewing logo is that's the low-hanging fruit. It's the most obvious choice, right? What says beer? Well, we use grains and we use hops and we make this delicious drink that everybody wants, right? So it's the low-hanging fruit. I think with the one that I just did, like I said, they're a farm. They're literally growing hops. They're literally growing barley. They're doing that. That is part of their being. And so therefore adding that to their logo along with, the wagon wheel and the things that go along with their brand actually worked pretty well. But I will say that, picking something creative or using the obvious thing, but in a really creative way is important. I think one of the major problems right now is that we have so many breweries. There's just so many craft breweries that are kind of cropping up that people do not do their proper research when they're trying to tell me what they're wanting. So I need some guidance. What do you like? What don't you like? I tend to throw a whole bunch of stuff out there and we whittle it down. But that's not the way everybody does it. A lot of people only present 2 or 3 really finished, in essence, pieces. Or if you're really gutsy, you show 1 and that's the way you push it. But I've never done that because I guess I'm not that gutsy, or I don't feel that confident. So I tend to throw a lot of things out there and see what sticks, and then we just keep kind of working through that process. But a lot more people are naming their breweries after themselves. That's pretty authentic, really. I mean, it is what it is. But if you're picking like a wacky name or something, then why wouldn't you choose something less obvious? Then I'm going to put some hops in there and I'm going to put some grain in there and we're going to call this a brewery logo.
Candace, I'm going to pick on you a second. Do you see people coming to you with finished work from a graphic designer saying this is our logo and this is all of what we're doing, and they've put all this work and time into it and haven't done their trademark research?
Oh, all the time. Why do you think I'm called the Dream Killer? Oh, we have this wonderful name and I love it. We've done all this stuff and we spent all this money. And I'm like, yeah, too bad someone else already has it. And I mean, I just had someone this week, like they'd already formed their company. They didn't have a logo yet, but they were like so emotionally attached to this name. And yeah, pretty big company already has it for wine. And I'm like, well, you can ask them if maybe they're okay with using it for beer, and occasionally, depending on, who it is. And, it was a no-go in this case, but all the time.
Do you run into graphic designers that that are pretty savvy in beer that are looking for typography similarities, or is that something that is kind of random and outside of most graphic design awareness?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but I
Like the
will say this.
Lagunitas IPA thing.
Well, I mean, okay, that's a whole different subject of whether or not that was even trademarkable.
Right.
What I do run into is a lot of people whose graphic designer has told them, oh, as long as it's 15% different, we won't be violating copyright. And that's not true. That's not how that works. I mean, basically, if someone sees what you're doing and immediately thinks of someone else's logo, or that, then you're probably infringing, or there's at least a good case for infringement, which is why, to what Misty said with the, and granted, I do have, I have wheat, barley in my logo, but I'm a lawyer. Not a lot of lawyers have, barley, but yeah, I mean, the more people that try and put barley and hops, I mean, you're going to start looking just like all the other logos that have barley and hops. And especially if you do it in a circle and, with the hop in the middle and, and yeah, and it's not easy to search logos. It's a pain in the ass even to search it at the trademark office, but there is a way. They give design codes for every design element. And then you have to basically look up all the elements in relation to the class of goods. And of course, beer and wine and spirits, since and seltzer and hard seltzer, hard kombucha, because the trademark office considers all alcohol the same. But yeah, I think a lot of graphic designers aren't necessarily aware of what, what they can and can't do from a legal perspective. And I will say this as well, and this isn't graphic designers necessarily, but sometimes branding firms will come up with a lot of names that are very descriptive. Apparently that's definitely the way to go in the branding world, but that definitely doesn't work in the trademark world. You really can't trademark descriptive items or items that really anyone in the beer industry needs to be allowed to use, like IPA.
Yeah. How about you, Ben? Do you end up with people coming to you to create tap handles, and you end up doing consulting of, hey, you don't really have your brand fleshed out enough to even represent yourself on a tap handle?
Perfect time. I was going to raise my hand.
Okay.
And and chime in. I mean, having a good branding package is so helpful when it comes to having other products designed for you. I mean, I work with other people's graphics every single day, and you can tell the difference between a professionally created brand and something that someone put together. What did you say? Someone's cousin put together in Illustrator or Photoshop. It's really a dramatic difference. It's nice having options, right? So instead of having just one logo, having an icon or a few different icons, a typeface, all these different elements that we can use what we need and make it fit our medium. Especially with tap handles, we're working in a medium that is oftentimes different than others, right? A hat, a shirt, you have a lot of horizontal area to work with. So people don't often consider tap handles when creating a brand. So a good designer will have something that can be used vertically, which is really helpful. Sometimes people don't think of like, if you're going vertical, do you want your type to be stacked or rotated 90 degrees? And sometimes it's personal preference, but it's always helpful to have some guidance from the designer and have options available. It's less work for us, and less work for us oftentimes means we can keep prices down, but not always.
Yeah, understood. Dustin, do you run into a collaboration or working with graphic designers in terms of designing what a tap room is going to look like and kind of that whole personality piece?
We certainly would like to have that information. A lot of times they may not have that really developed yet by the time they get to us. And so we try to get that out of them as we get closer and closer to needing that kind of information for designing their tap room and the customer experience. It really helps to have that defined. So the sooner they can get that locked in, the better for us.
Yeah.
Laura, Julie has a question in the chat. Misty, how do you handle breweries asking for graphics that could be deemed inappropriate and or sexist, racist, cultural appropriation, ableist, etc.?
I honestly have never dealt with it. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen all the time, but I've been lucky and I haven't dealt with that. But I'm kind of picky about who I work with. I don't like and it's kind of going by the wayside. The sexual innuendo that was so strong in the craft beer industry early on as a woman was offensive to me, that everything had to have some kind of almost nasty connotation to it. That seems to be far, far less likely. And I kind of have identified some that are still thinking that like 12-year-old boy humor is really appropriate. And so personally, I personally just choose not to work with somebody that I feel is leading down that path. If I were forced to, or if it was somebody that I was working with on a regular basis and all of a sudden they started coming up with things, I think I just have to tell them outright that it's not appropriate. And I would refer them back to their lawyer. The lawyer's going to tell them what can be approved, what won't be approved, because there are still laws and legalities behind what they can put on a label and what you can name things.
Have you run into that working with the marijuana industry or with guns? I know you've messed with people in both arenas.
Not so much, really. I'll be honest. In MMJ, their laws are so strict that they can't possibly come up with anything too inappropriate. Sorry. My couple guys, one of them literally was the first legalized medical marijuana distributor in Colorado Springs. And so he's very oriented towards changing the laws and making sure that it's not that way. With guns, no, because my two gun guys that I had, they're old cowboys. And so they're all about, being appropriate and, there you go, little lady. And so it might be a little condescending, but it's certainly never that way. So I think that honestly, the craft beer industry is a little worse off in some ways with the naming of beers. They think that it's funny, but they're really kind of just keeping a goodly portion of their female drinkers out from buying their beer, because I'm like, I'm not buying that. I don't care how it tastes. It could be the best thing in the world. I'm not buying a beer that's called that. So.
And offending
Doug?
the female employees along with it.
Yeah, well, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, or not paying attention. Doug, do you run into, when you're valuing a brewery, the art, the brand, the personality that has been invested and created? Does that affect the value of a brand in a significant or meaningful way?
And I was going to ask Misty, often the name or the brand is really not transferable to, a new owner. So, because it's too embedded in the person or the ownership that currently has the brewery. Do you talk about that at all? Because I think that does impact, the trademark brand, and the value of that, in other words, I mean, you can have a space. We have two very close here that were recently taken over, and just, a new brewery moved in, renamed the brewery. But, the value to them was that they didn't have to do the build out or anything. And that made some sense. But to continue the name is, do you talk about, the legacy of the brewery at all?
I think it depends on when they're answering kind of the questions, like what is the vision for the future? Where do you see this going? How big do you want to be? And that kind of thing. But I definitely think that when you're creating the brand, that you're taking into account the tone of the voice of that brand, the values and the beliefs behind the people who are creating it. I think it would be incredibly difficult to just transfer that brand over to another person and be like, here, carry forth all of our beliefs and all of our values and everything that that we had hoped for, and all the things that we spent 20 years or whatever building, and carry on the way that we would, because nobody's going to be happy with that. The people buying it are going to want to make their changes, and the people selling it are going to want it to stay the same. I think that if you're looking at a legacy brand like that, that you would be buying that name knowing that your expectation is that you will be carrying on those values and those beliefs. So I wouldn't suggest it personally, but then again, dealing with a lot of startups, they're kind of not to the point that they're thinking about selling yet. They're just, they're just starting. So they're still in that giddy, honeymoon phase of, I'm starting a brewery, and not, hey, in 10 years, I'm going to want to sell this. And not that that doesn't happen, but I don't know that you could really expect a buyer to carry on that name in that way.
Yeah, I just think that some more thought ought to be given to that up front to say, what do I see in 10 years? And not everybody's going to have that goal of, selling, to grow it to the point where it would be sellable. They're just saying, hey, I want to do this for a period of time that I'm going to leave. And if somebody wants to carry on the torch, that's fine. But I do think, something should be done earlier on in the thought of that, because they might back themselves into a corner at some point. I mean, we've got Rubens here. I don't know if anybody's heard of that, and they've grown, quite a bit, but this is the owner's son, firstborn child. And I think that is a brand that will carry on and go beyond the family if that's what they choose to do, because they've grown to that size. And then we've got Georgetown, which is just affiliated with, a part of Seattle. So there's a whole lot of different, thought about that. But I'm very interested in the kind of the branding thought process.
Mandy, how did this unfold for you when Tabernash changed?
Well, we tried to run two brands in parallel, and that did not work out very well because one had momentum and one did not. And you couple that with, commonly we are undercapitalized businesses that frequently fail to devote enough money to marketing to begin with. Enough money to market one brand, let alone two. So eventually we had to let the Tabernash brand fade away and move everything under the Left Hand label, which that had traction in the market, that had momentum. We still own the intellectual property for the Tabernash brand and could someday revive it in some form should we choose to do so. But, we, I think, have our hands full trying to sufficiently market our Left Hand brand, again, given the fact that, we recently had a discussion among our management and board that, we don't sufficiently support our marketing effort. And again, that's I think typical of the small brewing industry. Now, one question I would have for Misty and probably Julie too, would be, is there a number, a rule of thumb as far as percentage of, say, revenues that should be devoted to marketing and branding to get some impact? And
85%.
$1 billion.
I think Julie could probably speak to that better, maybe. I don't know.
what does that leave for making beer?
It doesn't. That's the thank you for asking me about this. I swear, if I had $1 for every time one of my folks in my network asked me this, I wouldn't even have to take clients anymore. My chunky number that it makes everybody poop their pants when I tell them this, is that it depends on your product life cycle phase. So if you're a startup or in planning or still growing, which usually encompasses breweries or, whatever, beverage companies, just overall, kind of in the ballpark of like, you've been around for less than maybe 7 to 10 years, honestly, maybe less than, maybe it's 5 to 7, depending on how much growth you've experienced. So it depends on how much brand awareness you have, like what markets you're in, stuff like that. But if you're still a growing brand, you should be devoting, everybody sit down, 12 to 20% of your gross revenue to marketing. But my budget's a little bit different. For me, that also includes labor, because at that point, you probably don't have a dedicated person that's like full-time marketing all the time. It's probably a collective effort, and it's probably DIY, but the cost of your time is what you put into that. Because if you're doing marketing, then you're not doing something else, and that has a value to it. So some people don't include labor in their marketing budgets. I do, for like small to medium size companies, like from nano startup all the way to medium. If you are beyond the growth phase and you're in maturity, or God forbid decline, some brands are, you can devote less money to that. So 8 to 12% of your gross revenue, because at that point your brand is established and you're really focused on differentiation and like reinvention, then you are actually like casting a wide net. And I also chunk everything in there, like that's software, designer costs, like contract labor, like if you hire out to, third party stuff, materials, merch, tap handles, website, all that stuff. I chunk a lot of that. So when people hear like 20% of gross revenue, and then I tell them what's in there, and they're like, oh, okay, well, that's a little bit more understandable. So hopefully that helps. If people want to use my numbers, they can. I don't know, just be prepared for like the
Julie, do you find that you get people coming to you to market their business that really need a graphic designer, and do you refer them out to say, hey, you can't do this until you do more work on your brand?
Yeah, I always tell people from the beginning, I'm a teacher, not a doer. So don't ask me to do any of this stuff. I can do it, but you would have to pay me a grotesque amount of money to do it, because I don't want to do it myself anymore. But when people are at a point where I can look at their materials, like, because I bleed over into sales so much, the first thing I always look at is their sell sheets. And if their sell sheets look like shit, then I'm like, then it's like Misty is laughing, because like then you have to go back to the drawing board. Like you kind of start right there at the end and look at like, what does the social media look like? What does their website look like? Can I sign up for their email? I go into like stalker mode when I work with somebody. So like I get all their stuff and I look at it. And if there's a consistency problem or a voice problem or some other reason, then I trace them back to the starting block and go back to basics of like, what are we trying to get across? Like, what colors are we using? What fonts are we using? Is the logo consistent? What are you trying to say with this? So on and so forth. And I do some of that with people, but I do warn them, branding's not necessarily my lane of expertise right from the beginning. I'm more like marketing strategy, not so much like design. So I do it, but that was my long-winded answer. Sorry.
There you go. Anybody else with questions about branding, design, marketing, anything that Misty can wrangle?
Misty, do you do point of sale materials for people, or just like web and logo and?
Lady, I do everything.
I figured you did. I just wanted to ask. Do you have any
I didn't used to do everything, but then I found that what you were talking to kind of the disconnect. So I had people that would hire me to create a beautiful logo. They had wonderful business cards. They had a beautiful website. They had some nice marketing collateral. And then they're like, okay, thanks, bye. And they would disappear. And the next thing I would see showing up was like some piece of crap piece that somebody in a back office somewhere said, oh, well, I took this logo and I stuck it on here and I put some words on there and look, and I'm like, yeah, great. That looks terrible. You know, honestly, I kind of pitch that if you're gonna pick somebody or you're gonna pick a group, kind of have an expectation that that's going to be a long relationship. So it doesn't matter who you choose. Some people want to choose a group so that they get like a whole bunch of different people kind of working on their project. Some people don't. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that you choose somebody and you kind of stick with them if you like them. If it works out, it's like a first date, right? Get your best foot forward. Does it work out or not? So if you like them and it works out, then stick with them for a while, because the reality is it's easier for that person or that group to take your pieces that they created and create all these other pieces, and actually the price per piece goes down. So when I have to use somebody else's logo and somebody else's stuff that they've created, there are times when, like Ben was talking about, there are times that that piece is not usable. They've given me a web optimized JPEG that is all of like 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch, and they're wanting a t-shirt, and I'm going, there's no way that's ever going to happen. So it costs them more at that time. If I have to completely redraw somebody's work that they bought or something, I'm going, man, this is crazy. So if I pick up somebody from the beginning and we start working together, and then they're like, hey, so I've decided that we want to do a billboard, and then we're going to do a bunch of merch, you know, and then we want to add these things. It's so much easier to do that process if it's something that you started to begin with. I have all the pieces that I need. I know exactly what that brand is and what they're wanting, than to be pulling pieces from other places and they've got like 16 different people worked on a project together and none of them knew each other. They just all were working on some small piece of this. So I would say that if you're going to do it, like most people, like you said, don't have the budget to hire somebody in-house, that they're in-house working, and they might not even have the amount of work required for 40 hours a week kind of thing. But there's lots of ways to, you know, there's lots of maintenance contracts. There's lots of ways to handle things that you're going to pay a flat fee or a per project fee, as opposed to piecemealing every single part. But it adds that connectivity, and that sales flyer, that might only cost you a little tiny bit compared to what it would cost if you just started trying to find somebody else to do it. And however long it took person in the back office to figure out, oh, well, I printed it out, but then the logo was all blurry, so that's not the right one. And I put a different one on there. And then I realized that font looks crappy. And then I realized you couldn't read the rest of it, or it doesn't all fit on this page. So they spent 3 hours, and you are paying them for every hour that they spent doing that, as opposed to their actual job, what they should have been doing. So
That's also how Misty ended up doing every possible piece of collateral for Big Beers. She said, oh, no, we need to keep that continuity going. So now
I'm
she
like,
just-
what? No.
I don't want to interrupt Ben because I see he raised his hand, but like on the tail end of this, I wanted to ask, because I'm guessing as a designer, like people that you work with, you probably give them like a brand folder, you know, that has like their color codes and fonts and things like that for imagery. But do you ever go so far as to give like a social media sort of brand folder? Does that make sense? Like if they're sort of crowdsourcing, you know, amongst the company, like a lot of people are contributing to their company's social media, like say a few people from the tap room and a few people in the brewery. And do you ever give them guidelines for like, this should have a logo here or any of that stuff?
You know, to some degree, and yes and no. So I would say yes, in the sense of that in a brand book that typically it'll tell you when to use the logo, how to use the logo, what sizes are appropriate, you know, which to use. I always give like a huge sheet on like, these are different file types. This is why you would use this logo, you know, if they're doing that themselves. But I'll be honest, if somebody is like hardcore social media, if they're running that company just like through, and they have every single social media platform that you could possibly think of, for one, I would ask them, are you sure that you should be on all those platforms? because they have different audiences. You don't necessarily, but why wouldn't we have Instagram and Facebook and you know what I mean? They start listing them and I'm like, well, because not all of those platforms are appropriate for you. So you have to think about your brand in that way. But as far as me deciding how they're going to set up their social media, I don't typically put that on there. I pretty much focus on web, online oriented web site, their site, but also if they were going to be promoted on somebody else's site or that kind of thing. And then anything in print, how you want that to show up. Somebody wants to be part of a festival and their organizers are saying, hey, we need a logo for you, what you would want to send and what have you, and how you would want that presented. Because what I feel like when it comes to social media from a marketing standpoint, that is a completely other beast to me. Now, granted, I'm 48 years old. So to me, I'm like, social media, hate it. I hate it. I know it's really, really important and that there's a lot of really young people that we need to be going after, especially those 21 to 29-year-olds in the craft beer world. But to me, that's a nightmare. Talk about if somebody's like, can you handle my social media? I'd be like, no, but I got a guy for that. I got somebody I can put you in contact with because I have absolutely no interest whatsoever in handling somebody's social media. So I don't really go down that rabbit hole. There are other professionals that's their thing.
Ben, did you change your mind?
No, I can ask you I noticed we were getting close to time. So, but Missy, do you provide your clients with vector art, right? With vector versions of all their logos, right? Because you mentioned people sending out just, tiny little low res images. And I would make sure anyone on this call, if you know anyone that's just working with JPEGs, have them call Misty, because a good graphic designer will provide all the vector art, and everyone that needs to do anything for your company should have access to that vector art, because that's going to make everyone's life easier, including mine.
Indeed.
Yeah, that was especially doing the program for big beers. I get like 80 really crappy logos that you can't even print. And people, they just don't understand the difference. So I think providing that like file descriptions and explaining what those different files are and why you would use them or not use them are, that's as important as anything. But when in doubt, send the vector art. So send an SVG or send the AI native file to anybody who's going to be printing your stuff. They can work with that. They're not going to screw it up. It'll look better anyway. So I see a puppy up there.
Yes, a puppy. Mandy's showing off this puppy.
It's my boss.
I thought your boss was your wife.
You're right, second in command.
Okay. Anybody have any questions about anything in general? We kind of went down the marketing rabbit hole, I think, in a really good way. And we probably have time for one or two more questions. If anybody brewers on the call want to throw anything out there for the group, you're welcome to do that. You're always welcome to reach out to people individually that are on the call or from our contributor list. All the contact information is available for all of our contributors online. Anybody else want to throw anything else out there, marketing, otherwise, anything we should be looking at or doing or reading? I can invent a new question for Misty.
You don't have to.
I don't have to.
Misty, I've got a question for you.
Sure.
What are your thoughts, like once you provide a brewery the logos and they go and use a program like Canva to create additional assets?
As long as, like we were just talking about, using the proper file, as long as they're using the proper file, then it should be fine. It's only when somebody uses the wrong thing that, artwork gets pixelated, or just muddy a lot of times. If you're going to like an embroidery or something like that, it just gets muddy.
And I know Canva doesn't allow you to bring in the high quality images sometimes.
Yeah, I would say that a lot of people, I don't know about everybody, so I don't want to talk for every graphic artist out there in the world. I don't know what they do, but I pretty much tell my clients that, like, if I've built a logo for you and you're wanting to use that in some way, you can send me an email and I'll tell you, I always provide a cloud-based folder that has all their stuff in there so that they're never like, well, I don't know, she built a logo 5 years ago and I don't know where anything is. I mean, nowadays, like, everything lasts forever or it doesn't, and then everything's gone, one or the other. But I pretty much always just say, here's every single logo type that you could possibly need, because I feel like once I built it, they've paid for it, it's theirs, it belongs to them. It doesn't belong to me anymore. The only time I give a little caveat is if I can use it on my website for my own promotion. But once I've created the logo, I want them to have all the resources available to them that they could possibly need. But I don't mind somebody writing me, which one do I send them? They want such and such. Okay, send this one. I don't charge for that. I built their logo. I want it to be displayed well.
She hasn't freaked out when I've done stuff with publisher.
Not freaked out. No, that's too strong.
Sometimes. Okay, so let's wrap this up and respect everybody's time. Again, looking forward to seeing everybody in person who's going to make the CBC jaunt. If you can't, we'll certainly miss you. If you can, please try to join us on Monday, 3:30 to 5:30 at Lakes and Legends. We won't have an RSVP for that, but I will send out an email just saying, hey, are you planning to come? Or maybe, and that way I'll have a name tag ready for you. Otherwise, you can certainly write one in, no problem at all. And then next month, Matt Hughes is in the contributor spotlight, and he's going to talk insurance. He's with NFP Insurance, and NFP is going to sponsor his a resource group for that session. So thank you to everybody for being here. I think it does make our group stronger, and it's just fun to see you all. Anybody who's joining us that is not necessarily part of the Startup Brewery family right now, if you're a brewer or a brewery owner, potential, current, future, please feel free to contact us. You're welcome to attend next month again online, or please come to see us in person. You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us from Albania. That's pretty cool. I don't know that you'll make the jaunt to the Craft Brewers Conference, but feel free to join us again. And that's all I got. So thank you all. I wish you a good, safe, pleasant weather world this afternoon, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Laura, I changed my flight during the beginning of the session when I found what time. I didn't realize apparently I didn't realize what time the Startup Brewery thing was at. And so I wasn't due to get into Minneapolis till 8:30. So now I'm gonna leave San Diego at 6:30 in the morning just for you.
Ouch. Well, I'm really thank you for doing
Well,
that.
Those are pretty much my options. 6:30 in the morning leave, or leave at 3 in the afternoon. So I guess it's 6:30 in the morning.
Well, I'm glad you can do that. I will feed you caffeine.
Yes. I will probably, I don't even know how I assume I'm cabbing or Ubering everywhere. So I haven't gotten that far.
I won't have a car either. It'll all be that way. I
It's
understand
Chester
there's
King all over again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Oh, Lord.
We should look ahead and see where would be a fun place to do that again. That was really nice.
Yeah, definitely.
Necessarily have a wish list.
Considering how much I had to spend to get to Minneapolis, I may have to save up for a little more.
That was stupid expensive. That was crazy. Crazy.
All the flights are so expensive now.
Oh yeah, but I can't get to Minneapolis from Cleveland no matter how you slice it.
I will tell you this. I think if we want to go like cheap place to fly to, I think we need to go to Vegas.
Yeah,
apparently I go to Vegas for like $50 one way. It's stupid cheap.
That's crazy. But you know what? My July tickets from Denver to Seattle are like $800 a piece.
What?
Southwest.
That is crazy.
Yeah. Insane.
Insane
prices.
I'm recording again.